Anniversaries were supposed to be a celebration of love, weren't they? A moment to pause, to cherish, to remember why two people came together in the first place. As I sat across the candlelit table from Melissa, my wife of 7 years, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her laugh was just a bit too forced, her eyes darting around the room more than they ever had. Melissa was stunning that evening, draped in a red dress that clung to her in all the ways that once left me breathless. Tonight, though, I couldn't escape a nagging discomfort in my gut. She raised her wine glass, her polished nails catching the soft light. "To us," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I followed suit, my glass clinking hers, but the toast felt hollow. Then, it happened. A man entered the restaurant, a tall, broad-shouldered figure I didn't recognize. He scanned the room, and Melissa froze. Her smile dropped for the briefest moment before she plastered it back on, but I caught it. Her hand instinctively went to her hair, smoothing it, an action so subtle most people wouldn't notice. But I knew her. I knew what that move meant. "Who's that?" I asked casually, tipping my head toward the stranger. Melissa glanced at me, her eyes wide for a flicker of a second before she chuckled lightly. "No idea." "Why?" "No reason," I lied, taking another sip of wine. The man walked past our table but not before shooting Melissa the kind of lingering look that made my stomach churn. And then, he was seated just a few tables away. My eyes darted between him and Melissa, who was suddenly glued to her menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. As the night went on, I couldn't help but notice the silent exchanges between them. Her nervous glance every time his deep voice boomed in conversation with his friends. The barely perceptible nod he gave her when she excused herself to the restroom. A knot of dread tightened in my chest as I wrestled with the growing realization. She was acting like someone with something to hide. When she didn't return to the table for what felt like an eternity, I decided to check for myself. My heart pounded as I walked toward the back of the restaurant. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I had to know. And then, I saw them. Melissa, my Melissa, was cornered in a dimly lit hallway near the bathrooms, talking to the man. Talking wasn't quite the word, though. Her body language screamed familiarity, a kind of comfort that she never had with strangers. Their voices were low, urgent, and though I couldn't hear their words, I didn't need to. Her hand was on his chest, his fingers brushing her waist. Rage. Confusion. Humiliation. It all hit me at once, a hurricane of emotions that left me rooted in place. My mind raced to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing made sense. Nothing could. I turned and walked away, back to the table, back to our untouched anniversary dinner. By the time Melissa returned, her face flushed. I had already decided I wasn't going to let this slide. "What took you so long?" I asked, my voice calm but edged with ice. "Oh, the line for the ladies' room was crazy," she said, her lie rolling off her tongue effortlessly. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I trusted. And for the first time, I realized that trust might have been the biggest lie of all. Melissa sat down, her glossy red lips curling into a smile as if everything was perfectly normal. I watched her, my mind playing and replaying the scene I had just witnessed. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table as I fought the urge to ask her about it right then and there. No, not yet. I needed to understand more before confronting her. "Is something wrong?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. The picture of innocence. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." She bought the excuse easily, or pretended to. Either way, I could see her relax, sipping her wine like nothing had happened. But I couldn't relax. My thoughts raced, dissecting every detail of her behavior over the past few months. The late-night work meetings that had started cropping up more often than usual. The sudden obsession with her phone, which she now kept password-protected. The mysterious text messages that made her laugh softly but prompted her to turn the screen away from me. I had ignored those signs, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. But this, what I had seen tonight, was something I couldn't ignore. As she chatted about some mundane topic, I nodded along, my responses automatic. Inside, though, I was plotting. I needed to know who he was, what was going on, and how long it had been happening right under my nose. The thought was unbearable, like a sickness settling deep in my chest. When the bill arrived, Melissa offered her usual smile. "I've got this one," she said cheerfully. That was odd too. Melissa rarely offered to pay for meals. It was a small thing, but now everything felt like a clue. Was it guilt? A cover for what I'd seen earlier? Or just another manipulation? I waved her off. "Don't worry about it. It's our anniversary." My voice felt like sandpaper in my throat. She beamed, oblivious, or pretending to be. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. As we left the restaurant, I made a deliberate effort to glance over my shoulder. The man was still there, watching us. He had the nerve to raise his glass in a mocking salute as Melissa slid her arm through mine. My blood boiled, but I didn't react. Not yet. Not here. The drive home was eerily quiet. Melissa stared out the window, humming softly, as if she hadn't just shattered my world. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every second felt like a lifetime, the silence between us thick with tension I wasn't sure she even noticed. When we arrived home, Melissa stretched and yawned theatrically. "That was such a lovely evening," she said, slipping off her heels. "Thank you for making it so special." I swallowed the anger clawing at my throat. "You're welcome," I said evenly. "I'm glad you had a good time." She disappeared into the bathroom, and I stood in the middle of our living room, staring at the framed photos of us on the walls. Vacations. Holidays. Smiles that now felt fake. I wanted to smash every single one of them, but instead, I grabbed my phone and began searching. I knew her password. She didn't know I knew it, but I'd memorized it the first time I'd seen her type it in. My hands trembled as I unlocked her phone and scrolled through her messages. My heart sank. There it was. Text after text from a contact saved as Jenna, but clearly not Jenna. The messages were intimate, flirtatious, laced with inside jokes that I wasn't a part of. And then there were the photos, selfies of Melissa in the red dress she'd worn tonight, sent to him with captions like, "Think you'll like this?" and "See you soon." I felt a wave of nausea and rage so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. I had all the proof I needed, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. In fact, it made it worse. She had lied to my face, again and again, while carrying on with this other man. The bathroom door opened, and Melissa emerged, wrapped in a silk robe, her face glowing from her skincare routine. Coming to bed, she asked casually, as if everything was normal. I stared at her, my jaw tight. "In a minute," I said, my voice strained. She didn't seem to notice, or care. She sauntered off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with the storm raging inside me. I needed to confront her, but not yet. I wanted her to feel as blindsided as I did when the truth finally came out. That night, I barely slept. Melissa, on the other hand, dozed off easily, her breathing soft and even. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Did she ever feel guilty? Did I miss signs from the beginning? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? Morning came too quickly, and with it, the weight of what I had uncovered the night before. Melissa woke up with a stretch and a yawn, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. Her ease, her confidence, it was maddening. "Do you want coffee?" she asked, padding into the kitchen. I followed her, watching her every move. Sure, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I felt like an undercover cop in my own house, collecting evidence while playing the role of the oblivious husband. Melissa handed me a cup of coffee, her smile as bright as the sunlight streaming through the window. "What's on your schedule today?" she asked. Her tone was so casual, so normal, it made my skin crawl. "I've got some work to do," I replied. "What about you?" She hesitated for just a moment, a tiny pause that most people wouldn't notice, but I did. "Oh, just some errands," she said, waving it off. "Maybe I'll meet up with Jenna later." Jenna. The fake name she'd used for her lover. Hearing it from her lips made me want to throw the coffee mug against the wall. Instead, I nodded. "Sounds nice." As soon as Melissa left the house, I sprang into action. My heart raced as I grabbed her phone again. I needed more. I needed to know just how deep this betrayal went. I found a recent string of messages, and my stomach dropped as I read them. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Thinking about you. Always." And the one that finally broke me. "He has no idea. It's almost too easy." I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I scrolled further, uncovering plans to meet again later that day. Melissa had saved the man's name as Jenna, but the details of their conversation made it clear that this wasn't her friend. They were planning to meet at a hotel just outside of town. It was like a punch to the gut. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I waited for her to come home, rehearsing what I would say. But when she walked through the door that evening, humming softly to herself, all the words I'd prepared flew out of my head. "Hey," she said, dropping her purse on the counter. "What's for dinner?" I stood there, silent, my jaw tight. "How was Jenna?" I asked, my voice cold. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Fine," she said, drawing out the word. "Why?" "Because I know you weren't with her," I said, stepping closer. "I know you've been lying to me." Her face froze, then quickly morphed into mock confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice edged with annoyance. "Don't play dumb, Melissa. I saw the messages. I saw him last night at the restaurant. You've been cheating on me, and you don't even have the decency to admit it." For a moment, she said nothing, her face unreadable. Then, to my shock, she laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, a full, dismissive laugh. "Wow, you've really lost it, haven't you?" she said, shaking her head. "You're being paranoid." I pulled out my phone, opening the screenshots I'd taken of her messages. I held it up to her face, my hand shaking. "Explain this." Her expression shifted, her confidence faltering for just a moment before she shrugged. "It's not what it looks like," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "He's just a friend." "A friend?" I spat, my voice rising. "You don't send pictures like that to a friend. You don't sneak off to meet a friend at a hotel." Melissa rolled her eyes, her tone turning venomous. "Fine. You want the truth?" "Yes, I've been seeing someone else. But can you blame me? You're so boring, so predictable. I needed excitement, something you could never give me." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. My fists clenched at my sides as I tried to keep my composure. "So, what? You've been lying to me for months because you were bored?" She smirked, leaning against the counter. "Don't be so dramatic. It's not like you're perfect, either." Her dismissiveness, her complete lack of remorse, it was like I was staring at a stranger. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking. "This marriage, everything we built together, it meant nothing to you, did it?" "Oh, stop playing the victim," she snapped. "Maybe if you'd been a better husband, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Her words stung, but they also made something inside me snap. I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about her utter lack of respect for me, for our marriage, for everything we'd shared. "You know what?" I said, my voice cold and steady. "I'm done. I'm not going to let you humiliate me anymore." Her smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means we're finished, Melissa," I said, walking past her toward the bedroom. "You can have all the excitement you want, with someone else." She called after me, her tone mocking. "Oh, so that's it? You're just going to walk away?" I didn't answer. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I was done being her fool. The bedroom door shut behind me, muffling Melissa's sarcastic taunts, but her words still echoed in my mind. "You're boring. Predictable. Stop playing the victim." I stood there in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, trying to collect my thoughts. My hands trembled, a mix of rage and disbelief coursing through me. This was the woman I had spent 7 years of my life with. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone. Now, she was a stranger, no, worse, an enemy. The silence in the bedroom was deafening. I could still hear her pacing outside, muttering under her breath. Eventually, she stopped. Then came the sound of her phone ringing. I froze, my ears straining to hear. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who eavesdrops, who sneaks around in his own home, but I couldn't help it. I pressed my ear to the door. Her voice was low, but I could make out the words. "No, he knows. I don't think he'll actually do anything about it, though. He's too. I don't know. Pathetic, maybe? Pathetic." The word hit me like a gut punch. She wasn't even pretending to feel sorry for what she'd done. She was mocking me, mocking the life we'd built together. And she wasn't hiding it. That was the part that stung the most. She didn't care if I heard. She didn't care about me at all. I threw open the door, my sudden movement startling her. She spun around, her phone still pressed to her ear. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to her, grabbed the phone out of her hand, and ended the call. Her mouth fell open in shock. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded, reaching for her phone. I held it out of her reach. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "None of your business," she snapped, her hand on her hip. "Give me my phone." "Answer the question," I said, taking a step closer. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "Who were you talking to? Was it him?" She rolled her eyes, her expression a mix of annoyance and disdain. "Oh, grow up, Nick." "Yes, it was him." "So what? Are you going to cry about it?" Her words cut deeper than I expected. I had braced myself for more lies, more excuses, but her bluntness knocked the wind out of me. She didn't care. Not even a little. I tossed her phone onto the couch and turned away, my hands on my hips as I tried to calm myself down. "You don't even feel bad, do you?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Not about the affair, not about lying to me. Not about anything." She scoffed. "Feel bad? For what? For finding someone who actually makes me happy? You act like I owe you something. Newsflash, Nick, this marriage hasn't been working for a long time." I turned to face her, anger and sadness battling for control inside me. "And instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix it, you decided to sneak around behind my back. You decided to humiliate me?" Her lip curled. "You humiliated yourself. You were so busy being the perfect little husband that you didn't even notice how miserable I was. Do you know how pathetic that is?" There was that word again. Pathetic. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I wouldn't let her bait me into a fight. If you were miserable, you should have said something. You should have left. But instead, you chose to lie. That's on you, Melissa. Not me. She folded her arms across her chest, her expression hard. Fine. You want to be the victim? Go ahead. But don't act like you're some saint. You're just as much to blame for this as I am. Her words stung, but I refused to let her deflect. I had spent too long trying to make sense of her actions, trying to justify them in my mind. But the truth was simple, she had made her choice. And now, I had to make mine. I walked over to the closet and grabbed a suitcase, throwing it onto the bed. Melissa watched me, her eyebrows raised. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone sharp. I didn't answer at first. I began pulling clothes off hangers, folding them haphazardly and stuffing them into the suitcase. "Nick, what are you doing?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You're seriously leaving?" I zipped up the suitcase and turned to face her. "I'm done, Melissa. I deserve better than this. I deserve better than you." Her face twisted in anger. "You're really just going to walk away? Like a coward?" I shook my head. "No. I'm walking away like someone who knows his worth. You can stay here with your lies and your lover. I'm done being a part of it." For a moment, she said nothing, her jaw tightening as she stared at me. Then, she laughed, cold and bitter. "Fine. Go. See if I care." I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door. My heart felt heavy, but I didn't look back. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. This was the end of my marriage, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better. Something real. Something honest. I walked away from the house, from Melissa, from the life I thought I wanted. And I didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind me, and with it, the life I'd known dissolved into the cold night air. The suitcase in my hand felt heavier than it should have, a physical manifestation of the emotional baggage I was dragging out of that house. I didn't have a plan, no destination, no clear idea of what came next. But one thing was certain, I couldn't stay another moment in that house, with her lies suffocating every corner. I drove aimlessly for hours, the rhythmic hum of the engine the only thing grounding me. My thoughts were a storm, replaying every moment from the night before, the texts, her venomous words, that smug smirk on her face. Every time I thought I'd reached the peak of my anger, a fresh wave of disgust rolled over me. How could she treat our marriage, me, like this? Like I was disposable. Like I was an inconvenience in her pursuit of whatever twisted version of happiness she thought she deserved. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a dingy motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered above me, casting a pale red glow onto the cracked pavement. It wasn't much, but it was enough for tonight. I checked in without much fanfare, the clerk barely looking up from his phone as he handed me the key. Room 207. Second floor. The room was as dismal as I'd expected, stained carpet, an ancient television bolted to the wall, and a bed that creaked when I sat on it. I dropped the suitcase on the floor and slumped onto the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. For the first time since the confrontation, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving only exhaustion and a hollow ache in its place. I stared at my phone, the screen lighting up with texts from Melissa. She had finally decided to start messaging me, though none of it was an apology. "Melissa, wow, you're really doing this?" "Melissa, you're being dramatic, Nick. Come home so we can talk like adults." "Melissa, what do you think you're proving by leaving? Grow up." I didn't respond. What was the point? Melissa had already shown me exactly who she was. She didn't feel remorse or regret, just irritation that her games were no longer under her control. I turned my phone off, tossing it onto the nightstand. I needed space, silence, and most importantly, clarity. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin motel curtains, but I felt no comfort in its warmth. I forced myself to get up, splashing cold water on my face in the tiny bathroom. My reflection stared back at me, tired and unfamiliar. Was this really my life now? Alone in a cheap motel, my marriage in ruins? But as I stood there, gripping the edges of the sink, I realized something else. This was also a chance. A chance to rebuild, to find myself outside of the person I'd been in that marriage. Melissa had torn me down with her betrayal, but she hadn't destroyed me. Not completely. The first thing I did after leaving the motel was contact a lawyer. I wasn't about to let Melissa drag this out, manipulate me, or weasel her way into keeping more than her fair share. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Angela, listened carefully as I laid out the situation. "She's not going to make this easy," I said, finishing my story. "She's vindictive." Angela leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes sizing me up. "Good. Neither am I." Her confidence was reassuring, and for the first time in days, I felt like I had some control. Next, I called my parents. Telling them wasn't easy, their voices were full of concern and disbelief. My mother's disappointment was palpable, not in me, but in Melissa. "I never thought she'd do something like this," she said softly. "We loved her like a daughter." "She fooled all of us," I replied. "But I'm done pretending." I also reached out to my best friend, Dave. He had been my sounding board for years, though I'd never shared the growing doubts I'd had about Melissa. When I told him everything, he didn't mince words. "Nick, she's trash," he said bluntly. "You don't deserve this. You're better off without her." His words, crude as they were, felt like a bomb. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in this mess. Over the next few days, I began to sift through the wreckage of my life with Melissa. I went back to the house, when I knew she wouldn't be there, to grab the rest of my things. Being in that space, surrounded by the ghosts of our relationship, was harder than I'd anticipated. The framed photos on the walls, the notes we used to leave each other on the fridge, they all felt like relics of a life that had never really been mine. I packed up what I needed and left the rest. Let her keep the house, the memories. I didn't want them. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but as the days turned into weeks, I began to feel lighter. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a local gym, not just to stay busy, but to channel the anger and frustration into something productive. I also started therapy. At first, it felt strange, sitting across from a stranger and spilling my guts. But as the sessions went on, I realized how much I had buried, not just about Melissa's betrayal, but about myself. I had let our marriage define me, shape me, and ultimately diminish me. Now, I was learning to rebuild, piece by piece. Melissa continued to text me, alternating between pleading and insults. I ignored her. Angela kept me updated on the divorce proceedings, which were moving faster than I expected. Melissa's true colors showed in every negotiation: selfish, petty, grasping. But I didn't care anymore. I was done giving her power over me. One night, as I sat in my small but peaceful new apartment, I scrolled through photos on my phone. There were pictures of Melissa and me, smiling at parties, on trips, at anniversaries. I hesitated for a moment before deleting them all. This was my fresh start. My chance to build a life that was mine and mine alone. And for the first time since the anniversary dinner that changed everything, I smiled. Weeks passed, and with every day, the weight of Melissa's betrayal grew lighter. The divorce was moving steadily, thanks to Angela's relentless approach, and my new routines, therapy, the gym, reconnecting with friends, were beginning to give me a sense of stability. Yet, as much as I tried to move forward, Melissa wasn't done trying to drag me back. The messages didn't stop. At first, they alternated between snide comments and desperate pleas. "Melissa, you're being so immature, Nick. Is this how you handle your problems? Running away? Melissa, can we just talk? Face to face, like adults? Melissa, I miss you. Don't you miss us?" I ignored them all, but I knew her well enough to sense she wasn't finished. Melissa wasn't the kind of person to lose gracefully. And I was right. One afternoon, as I was leaving the gym, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. "Unknown, Nick, this is Eric. I'm the guy Melissa's been seeing. We need to talk." For a moment, I just stared at the screen, disbelief flooding through me. Eric. So, he had a name now. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the hope for closure. Or maybe I just wanted to hear what this guy had to say. Against my better judgment, I replied. "Me, what do you want?" "Eric, I didn't know she was married until recently. I just found out. I think you should know some things." I hesitated. Was this some kind of game? A trap? Or was this guy as much of a victim as I was? After a few minutes of internal debate, I sent a cautious response. "Me, what things?" "Eric, can we meet? This isn't something I can explain over text." I agreed, setting a time and place, a neutral coffee shop downtown. The idea of meeting the man Melissa had been cheating with felt surreal, but my curiosity outweighed my discomfort. If he had information that could help me close this chapter, I needed to hear it. The next day, I walked into the cafe and immediately spotted him. Eric was tall and broad-shouldered, with an air of confidence that explained why Melissa had been drawn to him. But his expression was far from smug. If anything, he looked nervous. "Nick?" he asked, standing as I approached. I nodded, and we shook hands awkwardly before sitting. "I appreciate you meeting me," he began, his voice low. "I know this is weird." "That's one word for it," I replied, folding my arms. "What do you want to tell me?" Eric took a deep breath, running a hand through his short, dark hair. "Look, I didn't know Melissa was married when we first got involved. She told me she was in a dead-end relationship, that you were more like roommates than a couple." My jaw clenched, but I let him continue. "She's good at lying," he said, his tone bitter. "I didn't find out the truth until recently, and when I confronted her, she just shrugged it off. Said you'd never leave her because you were too weak." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. Melissa's disdain for me had been on full display during our last conversation. "I ended things with her after that," Eric said firmly. "But then, last week, she showed up at my place, drunk, talking about how she was going to ruin you if you didn't come crawling back." My stomach turned. "Ruin me? How?" He shook his head. "She didn't get into specifics, but she was furious. I don't know what she's planning, but I thought you should know." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Melissa wasn't just angry, she was vengeful. And if she couldn't manipulate me back into her life, she'd find another way to hurt me. "Thanks for telling me," I said after a long pause. "I appreciate it." Eric nodded. "I'm sorry for my part in all this. If I'd known, well, I would have stayed far away." I stood, shaking his hand again. "You're not the one who broke my trust. She is." That night, I sat in my apartment, staring out the window as the city lights twinkled below. Eric's warning played over and over in my mind. What was Melissa planning? And how far was she willing to go? The answer came sooner than I expected. A few days later, Angela called me, her voice unusually tense. "Nick, we need to talk," she said. "Melissa's lawyer just submitted some concerning claims. What claims? I asked, dread creeping into my chest. She's accusing you of being emotionally abusive during the marriage, Angela said bluntly. She's claiming you manipulated her, controlled her finances, and made her feel unsafe. My mouth fell open. What? That's absurd. I never. I know, Angela interrupted. But she's playing dirty, and we need to be prepared. The next hour was a whirlwind of emails, affidavits, and frantic discussions with Angela. It was clear Melissa was trying to paint herself as the victim, twisting the narrative to justify her actions, or at least to make my life hell. I was furious, but I refused to let her win. Over the next week, Angela and I gathered every piece of evidence we could, texts, photos, even statements from mutual friends who knew the truth. Melissa's web of lies began to unravel, but the fight wasn't easy. Finally, after weeks of tense negotiations, the divorce was finalized. Melissa's accusations didn't hold up under scrutiny, and she left with far less than she had hoped for. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The weight of Melissa's betrayal, her lies, her venom, it was finally behind me. I was free. And as I stepped into the bright sunlight, I realized something else: I was stronger than she ever gave me credit for. I wasn't pathetic. I wasn't weak. I was just a man who had been hurt, but who had refused to stay broken. The gavel had barely struck the wood, marking the official end of my marriage, but the weight I had carried for months was already lifting. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a mix of exhaustion and liberation. The air seemed fresher, the world brighter, as though shedding Melissa and her toxicity had pulled me out of a fog I hadn't even realized I was in. Angela, my lawyer, walked beside me, her demeanor sharp and professional as always. "You did well," she said, handing me a folder with the finalized divorce papers. "This wasn't easy, but you handled it with more dignity than most." I gave her a tired smile. "Thanks for everything. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." "You're free now, Nick," she said, pausing before getting into her car. "Make it count." Her words stayed with me as I drove back to my apartment. Free. The concept felt foreign, almost unreal. For 7 years, I had built my life around Melissa, around the idea of us. Now, there was no us, only me. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. That evening, I sat on my couch with a glass of whiskey, staring at the city skyline through the window. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, but I didn't need to check to know who it was. Melissa had been relentless in her attempts to contact me, even after the divorce was finalized. Her texts ranged from furious diatribes to half-hearted apologies, but they all shared the same underlying tone: control. She hated that she had lost her grip on me, and it showed. "Melissa, you'll regret this. No one will ever love you like I did. Melissa, can we just talk? You're being so childish. Melissa, enjoy being alone. You deserve it." I deleted the messages without reading further. Melissa's voice was a chapter one had closed, and I wasn't about to let her reopen it. Instead, I turned my attention to myself, what I wanted, what I needed, what my life could look like now that I wasn't tethered to her chaos. In the weeks that followed, I focused on reclaiming myself. Therapy became a cornerstone of my recovery, helping me navigate the emotional aftermath of Melissa's betrayal. My therapist, a calm and insightful woman named Dr. Warren, helped me unpack the layers of pain and confusion I'd carried. "You've spent a lot of time trying to understand Melissa's actions," she said during one session. "But have you asked yourself why you tolerated them for so long?" Her question hit me harder than I expected. Why had I stayed? Why had I ignored the red flags, the lies, the manipulation? The answer was uncomfortable but clear: I had lost sight of my own worth. Melissa's approval had become my measuring stick, and I had let her diminish me, piece by piece. I won't let that happen again, I told Dr. Warren. That's a good start, she replied with a smile. The real work begins with learning to trust yourself again. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was rewarding. I moved into a new apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in so much light it felt impossible to feel trapped. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage, reading, hiking, cooking meals that didn't involve Melissa's endless criticisms. I also started reconnecting with friends. Some of them had drifted away over the years, but when I reached out, they welcomed me back without hesitation. Dave, my best friend, became a constant presence in my life, dragging me out to barbecues and weekend hikes. "You're a free man now," he liked to say. "Time to enjoy it." One evening, at one of Dave's gatherings, I met someone. Her name was Lauren, and she was nothing like Melissa. Where Melissa had been sharp-tongued and dismissive, Lauren was warm and engaging, with a laugh that could light up a room. We spent hours talking that night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of genuine connection. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we began to see each other more. Lauren wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but what struck me was how different it felt. There were no games, no manipulation, just two people getting to know each other, flaws and all. Lessons learned. As my relationship with Lauren deepened, so did my understanding of what I had gone through with Melissa. Her betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forced me to grow in ways I might never have otherwise. I had learned the importance of boundaries, of self-respect, of recognizing my own value. I no longer saw myself as a victim. Yes, Melissa had hurt me, but I had chosen to rise above it. I had chosen to rebuild, to find joy and purpose again. That was my victory. Melissa didn't fade quietly into the background. One evening, months after the divorce, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. Seeing her standing there, clutching a bottle of wine and wearing the same manipulative smirk I'd grown to despise, was almost laughable. "What are you doing here, Melissa?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I miss you, Nick," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We had something special. Don't you think we can try again?" I stared at her, amazed by her audacity. "No, Melissa," I said firmly. "What we had is gone. And honestly, it wasn't that special." Her smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said, stepping back and closing the door. "The only mistake I made was staying with you as long as I did." As I locked the door, I felt a surge of clarity. Melissa no longer had power over me. She was just a shadow of my past, and I had no intention of letting her darken my future. Life after betrayal isn't easy, but it's possible. I learned to find strength in my pain, to build something new from the ruins Melissa left behind. Today, I wake up in a life I love, a life that's honest, peaceful, and full of possibility. If I could give anyone advice, it would be this: don't settle for less than you deserve. Trust yourself, even when it's hard. And remember, betrayal doesn't define you, your resilience does. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's living a life so full and so joyful that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. And that's exactly what I'm doing.